Wherever you are, I hope you're comfortable, perhaps lying down, perhaps resting your head against a pillow that has learned the shape of your dreams. The world outside continues its endless hum, distant engines, passing winds, the gentle rhythm of your own breath. Yet for now, we will drift into a quieter realm, a place where silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. Tonight, we explore the whispering brain and why silence, that most fragile and invisible of states, has the power to shape our thoughts, our emotions, and even the architecture of our minds. There is a moment that arrives just before dawn, when the air seems to hold its breath. The world pauses between darkness and light. In those suspended seconds, every sound feels magnified. The soft cracking of wood, the sigh of a tree, the pulse of your own heartbeat. Scientists call it the auditory threshold of quiet. Philosophers might call it the birthplace of thought. Throughout human history, silence has been seen as sacred. In monasteries, deserts, and remote mountain peaks, people sought it not because it was empty, but because it was full of something unspoken, something the mind could finally hear once the noise faded. But what does silence actually do to the brain? Why does a quiet moment feel like a clearing in the forest, a space where thoughts can breathe and find their shape? To understand that, we have to begin with what the brain does when it's not being quiet. Every waking moment, your brain is an orchestra of electrical storms. Billions of neurons communicate in bursts of tiny lightning, synchronized in waves of rhythm and pattern. It's a constant conversation. Sensory input, memory recall, emotional feedback, decision-making, all happening at once. And yet, even in this storm, there are pauses. Little valleys between the peaks of thought. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network, a collection of brain regions that activate when we are resting, daydreaming, or not focused on any specific task. Paradoxically, the brain is most creatively alive when it appears to be idle. When the world grows quiet, the default mode network hums softly to life. It is during these moments, when the mind is unfocused and free, that our most meaningful insights emerge. This is the brain's whisper, the subtle hum beneath our conscious noise. In 2013, researchers at the National Institutes of Health studied mice kept in different acoustic environments. One group was surrounded by constant background noise. Another was allowed long stretches of silence. The results were astonishing. After just 2 hours of silence per day, the mice developed new cells in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory, emotion, and learning. Silence, it turned out, was not just restful. It was regenerative. The researchers proposed that the absence of sound created a space for the brain to reorganize itself, repairing internal connections and preparing for new experiences. In the same way, human minds seem to find healing in quiet, our mental wiring rewoven during moments when we stop listening outward and start listening inward. Think of a forest after a storm. The trees may look still, but beneath the soil, roots are reconnecting, drawing nutrients from the earth, realigning for balance. Silence in the brain is much the same, an invisible repair. When you allow yourself true quiet, your auditory cortex, the part of your brain that interprets sound, doesn't simply go dark. Instead, it begins to listen for subtler cues. The rhythm of your breathing, the texture of your heartbeat, the tiny muscular tremors that accompany thought itself. In silence, the brain does not stop hearing. It begins to hear itself. Ancient traditions understood this long before neuroscience gave it a name. In Zen Buddhism, silence is not viewed as emptiness, but as the sound of the mind returning home. In Christian monasticism, the great silence after evening prayer is a period for divine reflection, not a void, but a bridge. Even in the natural world, silence plays a role in communication. A pause in a whale's song, the stillness of a lion before it leaps, the long quiet between cicada cycles, all are forms of information. Silence is nature's punctuation, the moment that gives meaning to sound. Our ancestors lived in environments where silence was not rare. A walk through a pre-industrial forest, the hush of snow over stone. These experiences shaped our sensory evolution. The brain learned to rest in stillness, to use quiet as a signal of safety. Today, surrounded by constant noise, that evolutionary wiring still seeks those calm pockets where the nervous system can rest. In the 21st century, noise has become the background hum of existence. Urban life hums at a near constant 60 decibels, a level proven to trigger mild stress responses in the body. Traffic, conversation, the distant buzz of electricity, all form a web of low-level sound that the brain must constantly filter. This filtering has a cost. Our auditory system consumes immense energy, processing even irrelevant sounds. Studies show that in prolonged noisy environments, the brain's prefrontal cortex, the area tied to decision-making and focus, becomes fatigued. But when silence returns, brain waves slow. Alpha waves, associated with relaxation and creativity, begin to rise. The heart rate lowers, cortisol levels drop, and the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode, quietly takes over. It's as if silence invites the body to remember its natural rhythm. Let's pause here for a moment. Feel the weight of the chair or bed beneath you. Listen, not for sound, but for space. There's a rhythm in that space, a soft pulse of thought, unfolding without words. That rhythm, subtle as it may seem, is the whisper of your brain reorganizing itself. Each pause you take is a small act of neural balance, the mind taking inventory, integrating fragments of memory, emotion, and imagination into something whole. It's easy to mistake silence for stillness, but stillness is merely physical. Silence is biological, psychological, and philosophical all at once, a harmony between sensory input and inner awareness. Historically, great thinkers have sought silence to find clarity. Isaac Newton spent hours alone beneath apple trees, his solitude misunderstood as eccentricity. Beethoven, after losing his hearing, composed some of his most transcendent music, born not from sound, but from imagined silence. Philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." It's a statement both simple and profound. The mind resists silence because silence forces confrontation, not with danger, but with depth. To sit in silence is to watch the mind reveal its shape, its fears, its curiosities, its forgotten corners. In that revelation lies growth. Modern psychology now supports what mystics have long felt. Solitude and quiet can enhance self-awareness and emotional regulation. A study published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience found that short daily periods of silence improved participants' cognitive flexibility, their ability to shift perspectives and solve problems creatively. Without external noise, the brain's internal dialogue became clearer, more coherent. It's as though silence acts as a mirror, not one that reflects your appearance, but your pattern of thought. When there is less sound, your awareness turns inward, tracing the flow of consciousness like water finding its course through rock. There's also a fascinating intersection between silence and memory. When we listen to music, the pauses, those tiny rests between notes, are essential to how our brain encodes rhythm and emotion. The same is true for thought. Silence provides the temporal boundaries that allow ideas to form, mature, and settle. In 2016, neuroscientist Michel Levan-Quine described this phenomenon as the temporal space of mind. He proposed that our consciousness depends on small moments of quiet processing, the microseconds between neural firings that allow information to integrate. Without silence, there is no synthesis, only reaction. And so, the whispering brain is not a metaphor. It's literal. It hums in frequencies too quiet for the world to notice. Even now, as you listen, millions of microcurrents travel through the folds of your cortex, translating sound into thought, thought into emotion, emotion into understanding. When the noise of the outside world fades, this inner orchestra becomes audible. Perhaps that is what poets mean when they say the universe speaks softly. The cosmos itself, at its deepest level, vibrates in near silence. The background radiation of the Big Bang echoing faintly through space, a cosmic whisper that never quite ends. The brain, too, hums with the residue of creation, a quiet persistence, a subtle rhythm of being. In the next part, we'll wander deeper into this inner landscape, exploring how silence affects perception, emotional healing, creativity, and even the way time itself feels within the mind. We'll see how different cultures have harnessed the power of quiet, and how modern science continues to uncover the biological necessity of stillness in an overstimulated age. For now, breathe softly and let the quiet do its work. The brain, after all, was made to whisper. Where we left off, the world was quiet. You could almost hear your thoughts breathe. Now let's stay there, in that still, receptive place, and begin to explore what happens next. When the outer world dims, another world awakens within. This is the landscape of perception, where silence is not an emptiness, but a field of hidden signals. Perception is the art of meaning-making. Every moment, your senses send the brain an avalanche of data: sights, sounds, textures, smells, movements. Most of it never reaches conscious awareness. The brain filters, edits, and translates, trying to assemble a coherent story. But silence alters this process. When the auditory system no longer contends with constant noise, attention begins to stretch in new directions. Vision sharpens. The subtle becomes noticeable: the texture of light across a wall, the faint vibration of air moving in a room, the quiet rhythm of your own pulse. In neuroscience, this shift is sometimes described as sensory reallocation. The auditory cortex, when deprived of external sound, does not go dormant. It becomes sensitive to internal cues, often repurposing itself to amplify other senses or internal sensations. In people who experience long-term deafness, for example, the auditory cortex may help process visual and tactile input. In silence, the brain does something similar, not permanently, but moment to moment, expanding awareness inward. You've probably felt this instinctively. Sit in a silent forest, and soon you begin to hear things that were always there. The whisper of wind weaving through leaves, the faint clicking of insects beneath bark, the heartbeat in your ears. What was once background becomes foreground. This isn't imagination, it's biology. The auditory system is tuned to relative contrast, not constant sound. When external input drops, the brain raises its internal gain, much like your eyes adjusting to darkness. Silence, then, becomes its own form of illumination. In 1958, a composer named John Cage entered a soundproof chamber at Harvard University, expecting to experience total silence. But what he heard instead were two faint tones, one high, one low. Later, he learned that the high tone was the sound of his nervous system, and the low one was the blood circulating through his body. Cage left that chamber transformed. He concluded that true silence doesn't exist, only varying layers of listening. He would go on to compose his now famous piece, 4 feet 33, in which musicians sit silently on stage for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, allowing the sounds of the environment, the audience's breathing, the shifting of chairs, to become the music itself. What Cage discovered mirrors what neuroscience later confirmed. The brain cannot stop perceiving. Silence only changes what it perceives. This ability to hear the unheard is one reason silence can feel so vast, even intimidating. When external distractions fade, the boundaries between internal and external perception blur. The mind begins to amplify its own rhythms. Thoughts echo, memories surface, subtle emotions ripple through awareness like wind over grass. In therapeutic psychology, this effect is sometimes described as the opening of the auditory self. When clients experience extended quiet during mindfulness or deep rest, repressed thoughts and feelings often emerge. The brain, no longer overloaded, finally has bandwidth to process what was postponed. This can be healing, but also challenging. Silence can confront us with ourselves. Neuroscientist Judson Brewer once observed that silence, in mindfulness practice, triggers a measurable pattern of neural activity, a shift from the task-positive network to the default mode network. In that moment, brain regions tied to external focus deactivate, while regions tied to self-reflection and memory light up. It's the same network active during daydreaming and imagination, suggesting that silence may be the natural state of creativity. You might imagine the brain in these moments as a pond. When noise and activity are constant, the surface is agitated, reflecting only chaos. But in silence, the surface stills. Beneath that stillness, unseen currents begin to reveal their patterns. Ideas rise slowly from the depths. This is why artists, writers, and scientists alike often describe breakthroughs emerging after periods of solitude, not through force, but through surrender. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Pythagoras required his students to observe 5 years of silence before being allowed to speak freely. It wasn't a punishment, it was preparation. He believed that only in silence could one learn to hear the harmony of the universe, what he called the music of the spheres. Modern acoustics later revealed that the Earth itself resonates faint, low-frequency vibrations caused by atmospheric and oceanic forces. They are inaudible to our ears, but measurable by instruments. In other words, the planet hums. Perhaps Pythagoras sensed a truth long before technology confirmed it. Silence eyescent the absence of sound, but the threshold of deeper listening. When you sit in quiet long enough, the line between silence and sound dissolves. You begin to notice that even silence has texture. It changes with time, with place, with emotion. A morning silence is not the same as a midnight one. The silence of snow feels different from the silence of an empty church. These variations arise because our perception of quiet is shaped by context, by how the brain as predictive systems interpret what it expects to hear. If you sit in a darkened forest, the rustle of a single leaf may sound enormous. In a noisy city, the same sound would vanish beneath the hum of traffic. Neuroscientists call this predictive coding. The brain constantly forecasts sensory input, comparing expectation with reality. Silence, therefore, is a kind of sensory contradiction, the moment when expectation is met with stillness. That mismatch captures attention, slowing perception, and stretching time. This stretching of time is one of silence's most mysterious effects. Psychological experiments show that during quiet moments, people often overestimate the passage of time. Without external markers, speech, rhythm, or motion, the mind drifts into slower temporal processing. Have you ever sat in meditation or simply waited in a still room and felt that minutes expanded into hours? That dilation is not an illusion. It's a neurological shift. When sound fades, the auditory cortex synchronizes with slower neural oscillations, primarily theta and delta waves. These are the same frequencies dominant during deep relaxation and early sleep. The subjective experience of time loosens, replaced by a sense of spaciousness. In silence, time breathes. There is a beautiful paradox here. Silence makes time feel longer, yet it also allows deeper experiences to unfold within that time. A moment of quiet reflection may feel infinite, yet pass in an instant. This duality, expansion and stillness coexisting, mirrors the way the brain balances excitation and inhibition. Neurons don't fire constantly. They rest between bursts, maintaining equilibrium through pauses. Without these pauses, communication would collapse into chaos. In other words, the brain itself depends on silence, microscopic silences between electrical impulses to create coherent thought. It's astonishing to realize that every word, every idea, every heartbeat of consciousness exists because between signals, there is space. That space is silence. The more you dwell on it, the more it seems that silence is woven into the very structure of life. In music, rests give melody meaning. In speech, pauses give sentences breath. In thought, silence gives awareness room to grow. Even DNA, the molecule of life itself, carries silent regions, non-coding sequences once dismissed as junk, now understood to regulate gene expression and timing. Life, at every scale, depends on when not to act as much as when to act. Silence sharpens perception because it mirrors the rhythm of existence. Everything in nature alternates, day and night, sound and stillness, growth and rest. Our nervous systems evolved in sync with this rhythm, learning that quiet signaled safety, that noise signaled alertness. When we restore silence, whether through meditation, time in nature, or simply turning off the constant hum of devices, we realign ourselves with that ancient pattern. The brain, relieved of its endless vigilance, finds balance again. That is why people often describe silence as peaceful. It's not only emotional peace, it's biological homeostasis. The body remembers what balance feels like. Consider the hermit thrush, a bird known for its haunting, flute-like song. Researchers discovered that between its vocal phrases, the bird pauses for irregular stretches of silence. These pauses are not mistakes. They make the song more entrancing, more unpredictable, a blend of structure and openness. When scientists analyzed its patterns mathematically, they found fractal properties, self-similar rhythms that echo natural forms like waves and coastlines. It seems even birds intuit that beauty requires space. Perhaps the brain feels the same, drawn not only to what is said, but to what is left unsaid. In modern life, reclaiming silence has become an act of restoration. Some hospitals now integrate quiet hours into patient recovery, reducing machine noise and conversation. Studies show that patients exposed to consistent quiet heal faster and experience less pain. Even in workplaces, strategic silence is gaining recognition. Engineers at tech firms like Microsoft and Google have introduced deep work periods, no meetings, no alerts, no noise, allowing the brain to operate in sustained focus. The results are consistent. Creativity and problem-solving rise when auditory distractions fall. The whispering brain thrives not in the roar of stimulation, but in the hush of deliberate space. If you close your eyes right now, you can almost feel this transition. The mind begins to float. External sound softens into distance. Thoughts settle like dust illuminated by light through a window. This is perception unbound, when silence becomes the lens through which consciousness sees itself. What you're experiencing isn't emptiness. It's the quiet circuitry of awareness, humming just beneath the surface of perception. And in that hum, the brain listens to its own whisper, a reminder that silence, far from being nothing, may be the most profound presence of all. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into how silence heals, exploring its effects on emotion, trauma, and the chemistry of calm. We'll learn why the nervous system needs quiet as much as it needs sleep, and how moments of silence can reshape not only the mind, but the body itself. For now, rest in the soft afterglow of stillness. The whispering brain is listening. The night deepens. The air feels softer now, more spacious. Perhaps you can sense it, the still hum of your own presence in the quiet room around you. There's something ancient about this feeling, as though silence isn't just an experience, but a memory, a return to a rhythm older than language itself. Tonight, we drift further inward, into the healing dimension of silence. Because silence, though intangible, has a profound physicality. It touches every system of the body, the heart, the hormones, even the architecture of the brain. When you sit quietly long enough, you're not just resting, you're rebuilding. For centuries, healers, monks, and philosophers all intuited what science is only now confirming. Silence restores balance. In Ayurvedic medicine, silence, mauna, is believed to renew the vital energy called prana, giving the nervous system a chance to reset. In Christian monasticism, the grand silence after evening prayers was thought to heal the soul through rest in divine stillness. Modern neuroscience has found these metaphors have measurable parallels. Silence isn't passive. It's active restoration. Let's begin with the nervous system. Our bodies are governed by two opposing yet complementary forces, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. The sympathetic is the accelerator. It floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol, preparing us to fight, flee, or act. The parasympathetic is the brake. It slows the heart, deepens the breath, and brings us back to rest. In the noise of daily life, the sympathetic system dominates. Phones buzz, cars roar, notifications pulse like small alarms. Each sound nudges the brain's amygdala, the region that scans for threat, into alertness. Even subtle, meaningless sounds keep the system engaged, leaving the body in a low-level state of vigilance. But when silence arrives, when noise truly subsides, the opposite begins to happen. The vagus nerve, a long-wandering nerve that connects brain to body, activates the parasympathetic network. Heart rate slows. Blood pressure drops. Muscles release their tension. The entire organism exhales. Neuroscientist Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory, calls this the social engagement system. When we feel safe, and silence is the ultimate signal of safety, our body shifts into a mode that allows connection, curiosity, and healing. It's why quiet moments with someone you trust can feel more intimate than any conversation. The body reads silence as permission to repair. In this sense, silence isn't the absence of interaction. It's the deepest form of communication between body and mind. Studies from the University of Pavia in Italy explored how silence compares to other forms of rest. Participants exposed to 2 minutes of true quiet between musical tracks experienced a greater drop in blood pressure and heart rate than those who listened to relaxing music. Silence was more restorative than sound meant to calm them. It's as if the body recognizes silence as its native state, a signal to return to equilibrium. Even brief encounters with quiet can trigger profound change. A 2020 review in Frontiers in Psychology found that microdoses of silence, small pauses during the day, even just 60 seconds, reduce cortisol levels and improve concentration. In other words, the body doesn't need long stretches of quiet to heal. It simply needs the permission to stop reacting. The brain, too, heals through these small intervals of stillness. During wakeful silence, regions involved in self-monitoring, such as the anterior cingulate cortex, increase in coherence. This helps regulate emotions and focus attention inward. In deeper, extended silence, the hippocampus becomes especially active in memory integration. In 2013, a study published in Brain Structure and Function revealed that mice exposed to 2 hours of silence daily developed new neurons in the hippocampus. That means silence, like physical exercise, may promote neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells. Imagine that simply being quiet may literally help the brain grow. This regenerative property may explain why silence enhances memory and emotional processing. The hippocampus doesn't just store facts. It knits together experiences into coherent narratives. When we're overwhelmed by noise, the hippocampus struggles to link emotional content with context. But in silence, the narrative threads reweave. You may have noticed this in your own life. After a stressful day, stepping into a quiet room allows your thoughts to catch up. Suddenly, connections form. Emotions make sense. The mind, given space, becomes its own therapist. There's also a profound relationship between silence and creativity. Psychologist Rollo May once wrote, "In stillness, the creative act begins." Silence allows divergent thought, the brain's ability to wander beyond the obvious, to find new combinations. When noise is constant, the prefrontal cortex, which governs attention and self-control, becomes overloaded. But in silence, this cognitive tension relaxes, allowing ideas from deeper, unconscious layers to rise. That's why so many creators seek solitude before inspiration strikes. Virginia Woolf described her writing process as a kind of listening. Beethoven composed his late string quartets after he had gone deaf, proving that imagination doesn't depend on sound. It depends on the mind's ability to listen inward. Silence is the soil from which original thought grows. On a biochemical level, silence changes the brain's chemistry. In calm environments, the body releases higher levels of oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and serotonin, which stabilizes mood. Meanwhile, cortisol and adrenaline diminish. Over time, this hormonal rebalancing strengthens the immune system and reduces inflammation. Chronic noise, by contrast, is linked to elevated stress hormones, poor sleep, and even cardiovascular disease. A 2018 report by the World Health Organization labeled noise pollution a modern epidemic, citing its role in tens of thousands of premature deaths annually due to stress-related illnesses. Silence, in this context, becomes not a luxury, but a biological necessity. There's a moment, though, when silence does something even deeper than physical repair. It allows emotional wounds to breathe. Trauma, psychologists tell us, is a kind of noise in the body. It loops, it echoes, it refuses to fade. When we enter quiet, that internal noise is finally heard clearly enough to begin unwinding. In trauma therapy, practitioners often use guided silence, long, gentle pauses to allow emotions to surface without words. The body begins to release what the mind once contained. As the nervous system stabilizes, memory fragments reorganize into coherence and healing begins. This is why, for many, deep silence feels both vulnerable and comforting. It opens the locked doors of the psyche, but only so light can enter. Silence also enhances empathy. In conversation, the most compassionate act is often not speaking, but listening. Neuroscientists studying mirror neurons, the brain cells that allow us to feel another's experience, found that these neurons fire most synchronously when participants listen in attentive quiet. That is, empathy deepens when the world stops talking. This explains why moments of shared silence, in grief, in awe, in love, feel sacred. No sound can carry the fullness of what silence conveys. It is the universal language of presence. In a physiological sense, silence is closely related to sleep, yet subtly distinct. During deep sleep, the brain cycles through restorative slow-wave activity, clearing metabolic waste through the lymphatic system. In waking silence, the same patterns can appear briefly, suggesting that quiet consciousness mimics sleep's cleansing rhythms. Meditators who enter deep stillness often show brainwave patterns similar to early non-REM sleep, theta and delta oscillations, yet remain awake and aware. This conscious rest may be one reason why long-term practitioners of mindfulness exhibit improved attention, emotional resilience, and even structural changes in gray matter density. So, silence doesn't merely mimic rest. It is rest, conscious, alive, deliberate. To understand this on a deeper level, imagine the mind as an ocean. Noise is the surface, waves, currents, storms. Silence is the depth, calm, vast, unmoving. At the surface, thoughts are scattered by every wind. But in the depths, the water moves slowly, powerfully, shaping continents without disturbance. The healing power of silence lies in this depth. When we descend into quiet, we tap the deeper layers of the nervous system, the slow biological rhythms that sustain life. Our breathing slows to match the rhythm of the Earth's own magnetic pulse, the Schumann resonance, oscillating around 8 Hz, the same frequency found in the brain's alpha waves. It's as if the body, in silence, resynchronizes with the planet. In hospitals, sound reduction isn't just about comfort. It's about survival. Patients in quieter wards show faster wound healing, lower heart rates, and fewer complications. Even premature infants exposed to controlled quiet, rather than machine noise, gain weight more quickly and exhibit steadier breathing patterns. The same is true outside medicine. Nature immersion, sometimes called forest bathing or Shinrin-yoku in Japan, relies heavily on silence. When participants walk mindfully through forests, away from artificial sound, stress hormones drop dramatically. The immune system strengthens. Natural killer cells, the body's cancer-fighting agents, increase. All because silence gives the body permission to repair itself. But silence does not demand isolation. You can find healing quiet even in the middle of the city, in the spaces between conversations, in the stillness before sleep, in the few seconds after turning off your phone. It's not about withdrawing from the world. It's about returning to it more whole. The brain doesn't need eternal silence, only intervals of recovery. Like the heart, it thrives in rhythm. Contraction, release, sound, silence. Healing lies in the balance between them. If you listen now, truly listen, you might notice that even your silence has a sound. The gentle hiss of air through your nose, the low drum of your pulse. These are not distractions. They are reminders that life itself is a kind of music, and silence is the space that makes it audible. Every heartbeat, every breath, every neuron's pause, they all whisper the same truth. To heal is to remember stillness. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into the mind's creative silence, exploring how stillness shapes art, innovation, and collective consciousness. We'll trace how history's quiet moments have altered the course of civilization, and how our modern world can rediscover the wisdom of listening. For now, let the quiet stay a little longer. Your whispering brain is resting, rebuilding, and remembering who it has always been. There is a peculiar stillness in deep thought, not the kind that happens when we are idle, or when our minds wander aimlessly, but the kind that descends when the noise recedes, when focus narrows, and awareness stretches outward like a hand reaching for the unseen. Tonight, we step into that kind of silence, the silence of the brain in its most mysterious act, thinking without words. For centuries, philosophers and scientists alike have tried to locate the source of human thought. René Descartes believed that thinking defined existence itself, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. But Descartes never heard the hum of neurons, never saw the rhythmic oscillations of the brain in silence. To him, thought was language. Yet, modern neuroscience is teaching us that thought, in its purest form, may not be verbal at all. When we fall quiet, not speaking, not even thinking in words, our brains do not shut down. They begin to hum differently. A network called the default mode network, discovered in the early 2000s, becomes active. It's a constellation of brain regions, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus, that lights up when we are not focused on the outside world. In silence, this network whispers. It drifts through memory, simulates futures, revisits emotions. It is in these quiet moments that creativity is born, that problems are unconsciously solved. Einstein once said that many of his best ideas came while sailing alone. No equations, no writing, just the gentle slap of water against the hull. The brain in silence is not inactive. It is introspective. Let's slow down and imagine this process. Picture the ocean at dawn. The surface looks calm, but beneath, entire worlds stir. That's what happens in your mind when you sit quietly and let thought flow without direction. Neurons fire not to react to the world, but to rehearse it, to reconstruct meaning from fragments of memory and intuition. When the environment grows quiet, the brain begins to listen to itself. There is a fascinating rhythm in these neural silences. Studies on meditation, for example, reveal that during prolonged quiet, where thoughts are noticed but not clung to, brainwaves shift toward alpha and theta frequencies. These are slow, rolling waves, much gentler than the sharp beta bursts of active problem-solving. Alpha waves, 8 to 12 hertz, are like the ocean's soft breath, steady, cyclic, balancing excitation and rest. They increase when we close our eyes or drift into daydream. Theta waves, 4 to 8 hertz, deepen the calm, often associated with drowsiness or the borderland between sleep and wakefulness. In this state, perception changes, time stretches. The boundary between self and world begins to blur. It is here, neuroscientists believe, that silence becomes something more than absence. It becomes integration. During this phase, the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory consolidation, communicates more freely with the neocortex. Information gathered through experience begins to settle, reorganizing into patterns that support understanding. It is as if silence is the mind's filing system, a way of placing each memory, each thought, each emotion into its rightful place. When we allow ourselves moments of quiet, we are not escaping life. We are digesting it. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "The quieter you become, the more you can hear." He wasn't referring only to the outside world, but to the internal murmurs of consciousness that are easily drowned out by constant activity. Archie, DME equals blocked. The 2nd of November 2025, 10:14 a.m. In modern society, the idea of silence can feel foreign, even uncomfortable. We fill our days with screens, notifications, conversations, and background noise. Yet anthropologists studying traditional cultures often find that silence has long been woven into the fabric of human life. In the rituals of many indigenous communities, silence marks reverence. In the Australian Aboriginal tradition, the deep listening known as Didiri is not passive quiet, but an attentive, sacred awareness, listening to the land, to one's spirit, to the echo of what cannot be spoken. Similarly, in Japan, the concept of ma, the space between, is valued in art, music, and conversation. It is the silence that gives form to sound, the pause that makes meaning possible. Across these traditions, we find a recurring wisdom. Silence is not the absence of communication, but its foundation. The same holds true within us. The mind, like a conversation, needs pauses to make sense of what has been said. There's another layer to silence, one that runs deeper than culture or cognition. It is biological. The auditory cortex, responsible for processing sound, does not turn off when external noise disappears. Instead, it starts amplifying internal sounds, the heartbeat, the rush of blood, the subtle electrical hum of the nervous system. This is why, in complete silence, you might hear a faint ringing or a low buzz. It is your body's symphony, always playing, finally audible. But the brain doesn't just hear silence, it responds to it. In 2013, a study conducted on mice by Imke Kirst and her colleagues found something remarkable. 2 hours of silence per day led to the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, the region involved in memory and emotion. The researchers had been studying the effects of sound, but it was the quiet control condition that produced the most striking change. Silence, it seemed, was not a void, but a signal, one that told the brain it was safe to grow. This discovery reshaped how neuroscientists thought about environmental influence. It suggested that the absence of stimulation could itself be a form of nourishment. That perhaps, just as plants need night to balance day, the brain needs stillness to balance sensation. In the natural world, silence is rarely total, but it is always meaningful. The forest at dusk, for instance, grows quieter, not because life ceases, but because it shifts. Birds retreat, insects begin their hums, the air cools. It's a biological intermission, a space between two acts of existence. Likewise, our minds need this intermission. When noise is constant, neural circuits are overworked. Sensory pathways lose precision. But when quiet returns, the brain rebalances. It fine-tunes its receptors, resets thresholds, and strengthens the subtle rhythms that keep perception clear. There is a rhythm to everything, even to silence. And perhaps that rhythm is why so many thinkers, artists, and scientists have turned toward quiet moments to create. From Newton as orchard to Darwin's solitary walks along the sandwalk at Downhouse, silence has been the unseen collaborator in discovery. It is the space in which intuition has room to breathe. In the next part of our journey, we'll explore how silence interacts with the social mind, how relationships, empathy, and even language itself depend on the pauses between sounds. We'll travel through the neuroscience of conversation, the psychology of listening, and the philosophy of shared quiet. But for now, let this stillness linger. Let the mind hum softly in its ocean of thought. Because silence, as it turns out, is not where thinking ends, it's where it begins. There is a kind of silence that lives between people. It is not the silence of emptiness or awkwardness, but something subtler, a shared pause, where understanding flows without the need for words. If you've ever sat beside someone you love, saying nothing at all, yet feeling perfectly understood, you've felt this kind of silence. It is the quiet of connection, the moment when two nervous systems begin to resonate in stillness. Tonight, we'll drift into that realm, the social dimension of silence. Because silence doesn't only shape individual thought, it shapes the invisible architecture between minds. Humans are profoundly social creatures. Our brains are built for communication, tuned to the subtleties of gaze, gesture, tone, and timing. Yet, paradoxically, silence is one of our most powerful communicative tools. In conversation, silence punctuates meaning. It creates rhythm and gives shape to emotion. Linguists call these pauses conversational gaps, but to the listener, they are more than structural. They are interpretive. Consider how a pause can transform the same words. I forgive you. Silence. But I won't forget. Or, I forgive you. Soft silence, then a breath, because I understand. The same phrase, carried by silence, can heal or wound, depending on the rhythm of stillness surrounding it. Our brains perceive silence not as a void, but as an active signal. Neuroimaging studies reveal that when a person hears a pause after speech, the auditory cortex continues to fire. It listens into the silence, predicting what will come next. This is known as temporal prediction, and it's one of the brain's most refined skills. Silence, in this sense, is not passive. It's the brain's way of anticipating meaning. In Japanese conversation, silence is often valued as a sign of respect or thoughtfulness. In Finnish culture, it can signal trust and ease. Yet in many Western societies, silence tends to provoke discomfort, a space that must be filled. Psychologists have observed that people from cultures where silence is less tolerated often overcompensate by speaking more rapidly or filling pauses with filler words. These are not signs of laziness. They are attempts to bridge the gap where silence feels socially unsafe. But beneath this cultural variation lies a universal truth. Silence allows emotional information to emerge. When a person stops speaking, their face, posture, and breathing become louder than words. The mirror neuron system, a network of cells in the promoter and parietal cortex, responds to these subtle cues, allowing us to feel what others feel. This is empathy's quiet machinery. In silence, the mirror neurons hum more clearly. The noise of speech fades, and we begin to sense rather than simply hear. This might explain why the most intimate conversations often end not with words, but with shared quiet. Silence also governs the way we listen. Most of us think of listening as the act of waiting for our turn to speak. But true listening, what psychologists call active listening, requires stillness, both external and internal. In therapy sessions, Skilled practitioners often use silence deliberately. They let the client's words hang in the air just long enough for deeper thoughts to surface. This is not manipulation. It's space-making. Studies from the field of clinical psychology show that when therapists allow silence to stretch for about 5 to 10 seconds after a client finishes speaking, the client is significantly more likely to continue with more emotionally rich or insightful content. Silence, it seems, opens a door. This same dynamic unfolds in daily life. When we stop speaking, we give the other person's nervous system permission to breathe. Their prefrontal cortex, busy with self-monitoring and language formulation, relaxes, allowing emotional truth to rise to the surface. It's as if silence is a small act of generosity, a way of saying, you are safe to think. But silence doesn't only deepen connection, it also reveals discomfort. In moments of tension, silence can stretch like a tight wire. Our heart rate increases, our muscles brace, our brain predicts threat. This is the limbic system at work, the emotional core of the brain that evolved to interpret pauses as potential danger. In our evolutionary past, a sudden silence in the forest meant that something was wrong. Birds fell quiet when predators were near. Insects ceased their hum. Our ancestors learned to listen for the absence of sound as a signal of risk. That ancestral vigilance still lingers in our modern nervous systems. When conversation stops abruptly, our bodies may interpret it as a sign that something has changed, perhaps rejection, anger, or judgment. It is fascinating, then, that the same mechanism that makes silence calming in safe contexts can make it excruciating in uncertain ones. The meaning of silence depends entirely on the emotional landscape surrounding it. Within the brain, these interpretations unfold across several regions. The amygdala, which monitors emotional salience. The anterior cingulate cortex, which detects conflict or discomfort. And the insula, which processes interoceptive sensations, the flutter of the stomach, the catch in the throat. When silence feels awkward, it's often because the insula is amplifying bodily sensations, feeding them back to the brain as emotional data. We don't just feel silence, we embody it. This is why musicians sometimes describe performing in front of an audience as dancing with silence. Every pause, every held note, feels alive. The tension is not emptiness, but energy, a living thread between performer and listener. Perhaps this is what silence truly is, a shared breath of potential. Let's turn now to the way silence shapes memory in social contexts. When two people experience something meaningful together, a moment of awe, grief, or love, and fall silent afterward, the brain encodes that event differently than if they had talked through it. Neuroscientists studying emotional memory have found that moments of collective stillness activate both the hippocampus and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which together weave emotion and context into long-term memory. The lack of words seems to heighten the sensory and emotional texture of the experience, allowing it to sink deeper into memory's fabric. That's why funerals, stargazing, or simply watching rain with someone can feel profoundly bonding without a single word exchanged. Silence marks the sacredness of experience. We often speak of holding space for someone, but silence is that space. In the age of constant connectivity, this kind of shared stillness is increasingly rare. Digital life trains our brains toward continuous stimulation, microbursts of novelty and feedback. Notifications, scrolling, ambient chatter all keep the prefrontal cortex on high alert, never resting long enough to enter reflective silence. This has consequences not only for focus, but for empathy. Research from the University of Michigan found that college students in 2010 scored 40% lower on measures of empathy than those in the 1980s, a decline correlated with the rise of digital media. While causation is complex, one hypothesis suggests that constant distraction erodes our tolerance for silence, and with it, our ability to truly attend to others. Without silence, empathy cannot grow roots. Silence, then, is not only an individual refuge, but a social skill, one that allows us to stay present in the currents of another person's inner world. And perhaps it is no coincidence that the same neural systems that help us tolerate external silence, the default mode network, the insula, and the anterior cingulate, are also active when we practice compassion and perspective-taking. Silence, both inside and between us, seems to be the nervous system's language of connection. In the next part, we will journey even deeper into the spiritual and evolutionary aspects of silence. We'll explore why nature itself seems to move to a rhythm of quiet and sound, and how our species has long sought the wisdom that dwells in wordless spaces. But before we move on, take a moment to notice the silence you're in right now, the faint hum of your surroundings, the breath moving in and out of your chest. Even now, your brain listens, and in that listening, it becomes a little more alive. Somewhere deep in the forest, before the first light of dawn, the air holds its breath. The leaves are still. The birds have not yet begun to sing. The world seems suspended in an ancient pause, the moment before awakening. This is the silence that life itself seems to know. It is not lifeless nor empty. It is pregnant with potential, the kind of stillness that precedes creation. Tonight, we drift into that larger silence, the one that does not belong only to the human mind, but to the living earth. Because the story of silence is older than thought. It began long before words, in the quiet rhythm of evolution itself. Silence is, in many ways, the original environment. Before there was sound, there was vibration, subtle, continuous, unseen. Billions of years ago, before the first animal made a noise, the ocean was a realm of near total stillness. Life unfolded quietly, governed by chemistry and light. Microbes drifted, photosynthetic mats spread, and cells divided in silence. Communication existed, but not through sound. Instead, it was chemical, whispers of molecules diffusing through water, carrying messages of survival, cooperation, and warning. This was the proto-language of life, a molecular murmur that connected the earliest forms of being. Then, slowly, sound entered the story. Fish began to perceive vibrations through the water. Insects evolved stridulations. Mammals found their voices. Yet even as sound expanded, silence remained the background upon which it was written, the necessary contrast that made communication possible. Like a painter's canvas, silence is not nothingness. It is the condition for everything. The human brain evolved within this rhythm, the alternation of quiet and noise, rest, connectivity, input, and integration. Neuroscientists now believe that one of the brain's most ancient mechanisms, the reticular activating system, helps regulate this dynamic. It filters sensory information, determining what deserves attention and what should fade into the background. In essence, it protects the mind's silence. When we live in a world of constant sound, this system works over time. It struggles to discern what matters, leading to fatigue and diminished focus. But when the environment falls quiet, it resets, allowing attention to recover. This may explain why so many of humanity's spiritual and contemplative traditions emerged in quiet places, deserts, mountains, caves, forests. Silence, as it turns out, is an evolutionary ally of awareness. Long before neuroscience existed, early humans seemed to intuit this truth. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira were created deep underground in spaces of near total silence. Archaeologists believe that the artists traveled far from daylight, carrying torches, listening to their own breathing echo off the walls. In that silence, the boundary between the inner and outer world blurred. The images they painted, of animals, spirits, and celestial shapes, may have emerged from the altered consciousness that deep quiet can evoke. Modern research supports this intuition. Studies on sensory deprivation show that when external noise is minimized, the brain begins to amplify internal signals, imagination, memory, and vision. In profound silence, people often report hearing their heartbeat, seeing fleeting patterns of light, or feeling as if time slows down. The same physiological mechanisms that amplify creativity and insight today were likely shaping early human art tens of thousands of years ago. Silence, then, was not only a spiritual or aesthetic choice, it was a biological catalyst for imagination. Nature itself still teaches this rhythm. Watch a predator stalk its prey. Every motion slows, every sound fades. Silence becomes survival. Listen to a bird before it sings, a moment of measured quiet, as if the world itself is holding a note before release. Even in the cycles of ecosystems, silence has its place. Nightfall softens the chorus of daytime animals. Winter quiets the forest, conserving energy for spring's renewal. These natural pauses are not absence, but recovery. They are the lungs of life inhaling and exhaling across time. In this way, silence is not merely a human need, it is a planetary principle. Within our own species, this principle evolved into the foundation of contemplation. Ancient texts from every tradition reference silence as a path to wisdom. In Taoism, Wu Wei, effortless action arises from attunement to stillness. In early Buddhism, silence is both discipline and revelation. The Buddha himself was often described as the silent sage. In the desert monasticism of early Christianity, silence became a form of devotion. The desert fathers of the 3rd and 4th centuries withdrew from the cities into the wilderness, seeking God not through argument or proclamation, but through quiet. To them, silence was not withdrawal, it was encounter. In Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam, silence, Samt, is considered the language of the heart. Jalaluddin Rumi wrote, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." Across civilizations, the same pattern emerges. Silence is where perception refines itself, where the mind meets what words cannot capture. Modern psychology now offers a bridge between this ancient wisdom and neuroscience. When the prefrontal cortex, the seat of language and planning, quiets down, activity shifts toward more distributed networks involving the limbic and sensory regions. This transition, often measured during meditation, creates what researchers call hypofrontality, a state of diminished self-consciousness and expanded awareness. In this state, people often report feelings of unity, timelessness, and clarity. The boundaries of the self begin to dissolve, allowing the brain to process experience as a whole rather than in fragments. It is no coincidence that mystics across cultures describe their silent encounters with the divine or the infinite using similar metaphors: vastness, light, peace. The physiology of silence may be the common thread beneath these varied experiences. But silence does not always arrive gently. For some, quiet can feel unsettling. When the external world falls still, the internal world grows louder. Suppressed memories, emotions, and anxieties begin to surface. The same neural mechanisms that enable self-reflection can also unearth discomfort. This is why silence, though healing, requires courage. The brain, when deprived of stimulation, turns inward. If what it finds there is unresolved, the silence becomes a mirror, one that reflects not only peace, but pain. Yet even here, silence has its role. By bringing unspoken emotions to awareness, it offers the chance for integration. The psychotherapist Carl Jung described this process as active imagination, a dialogue between the conscious and unconscious mind that begins when words are set aside. Silence is the bridge that allows that dialogue to begin. We might say, then, that the whispering brain is not whispering to us. It is whispering as us. Its murmurs are the background hum of a consciousness forever balancing between stillness and movement, between knowing and wondering. In a way, silence reveals that thought itself is not a linear process, but a rhythm. Like the pulse of the tide or the turning of the seasons, our inner world moves through cycles: noise and rest, input and reflection, speaking, and listening. The health of the mind depends on these oscillations, just as the earth depends on day and night. And so, silence becomes not only a mental luxury, but a biological necessity. As we look toward the next chapter, we'll explore silence on an even grander scale, how it shapes civilizations, creativity, and the evolution of consciousness itself. Because the whispering brain is not confined to an individual mind. It echoes through art, science, and collective awareness, teaching us that silence, far from being the absence of life, is the pulse beneath it. So let the world grow quiet again. Let the hum of existence fade to a low vibration. In that quiet, if you listen closely enough, you might hear not just your thoughts, but the memory of life itself, still whispering. Imagine standing on a cliff edge at dusk. Below you, waves collide with the shore in long, patient breaths. Above, the stars are beginning to appear, slow and ancient, each one a fragment of light from a time before language. And for a moment, you feel it, that hum beneath all things. A soft awareness that seems to run through air, rock, and water alike. It is not thought in the human sense, but something quieter, a planetary kind of reflection. Could the earth itself be thinking? This is not a new question. Long before modern science, many cultures spoke of a living earth, a being with its own breath, pulse, and consciousness. In Greek philosophy, this idea took the form of Gaia, the earth goddess. In many indigenous cosmologies, the land was not an object, but a relative, a teacher, a mind. And then, in 1972, a British scientist named James Lovelock revived this ancient intuition in modern language. He proposed the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that Earth behaves like a self-regulating organism, maintaining conditions suitable for life through a complex web of feedback loops between living and non-living systems. It was a scientific theory, yes, but beneath it, there was something poetic. The notion that life is not merely on Earth, but of it. That every breath we take is part of a planetary respiration that began billions of years ago. Biology often tells us that intelligence is a property of brains. But perhaps it is more accurate to say that brains are one expression of intelligence, the kind that happens to work through neurons. Because when we zoom out far enough, we see other forms of cognition at play. The self-organization of coral reefs, the coordinated flowering of plants, the migration of animals tracing invisible maps across oceans. These are not random acts. They are distributed patterns of sensing and responding, the signatures of an older, quieter kind of knowing. In this sense, Earth's biosphere functions like a vast neural network. Each species, each ecosystem, each microbe in the soil contributes to the regulation of the whole. When a forest exhales oxygen, when fungi transfer nutrients beneath the ground, when plankton blooms shift in response to temperature, these are the Earth's thoughts, expressed through chemistry instead of words. Modern ecology and cognitive science are beginning to converge on this realization. Distributed cognition, a concept in psychology, suggests that intelligence can emerge not from a single brain, but from the interactions of many agents, a school of fish, a colony of ants, a human society. By that logic, Earth's biosphere might be the largest example of distributed intelligence we know. We, as humans, are one node in that network, capable of self-reflection, yet dependent on the quiet computations of air, water, and soil. Our civilization's data centers may hum with digital thought, but beneath them lies an older and deeper processing system, the photosynthetic brain of the planet. Even geologically, Earth seems to remember. Every river channel carved into stone, every fossilized leaf, every magnetic trace in the seabed, these are memory systems. They record experience across time, storing information about past climates, extinctions, and renewals. If we read them closely, we find that the planet does not forget. It carries the long story of trial and adaptation, of destruction and repair. Just as neurons strengthen connections through repetition, the Earth too learns through cycles: drought and rain, fire and regrowth, ice and thaw. This is geological cognition, a learning process measured not in years, but in epochs. Psychology adds another layer to this picture. Human consciousness often mirrors the patterns of the planet that birthed it. Our minds cycle through day and night, growth and rest, chaos and order, echoes of the biosphere's own rhythm. When we meditate, we return to stillness, the brain's version of ecological balance. When we dream, neural networks wander through uncharted landscapes, just as rivers carve new paths through land. Perhaps that is why so much of human philosophy arises from metaphors of nature: the stream of consciousness, the roots of thought, the light of awareness. Even our inner language knows the mind is a miniature ecosystem. Yet the harmony between mind and earth is fragile. Our civilization's noise, industrial, digital, psychological, has begun to drown out the planet's subtler frequencies. When forests fall silent, when coral reefs bleach white, when soil loses its living pulse, these are not just environmental events. They are disruptions in the planetary network that once sustained reflection itself. The loss of biodiversity may not only mean fewer species. It may mean a dimming of the Earth's collective intelligence. We are, in a sense, interrupting the very system that taught us how to think. Still, there is hope, because awareness itself is the first step toward repair. Just as the brain heals by reconnecting its pathways, humanity can help the planet restore its ecological memory. Every reforestation effort, every act of regeneration, every conscious pause, these are not just environmental gestures. They are cognitive ones. We are helping the Earth remember how to think clearly again. And so, perhaps the question is not, does the Earth think? Perhaps it is. Can we learn to think with the Earth again? To listen to the slow intelligence of weather, the measured wisdom of stone, the patient logic of roots. To synchronize our awareness with the rhythm that has always sustained us. In that alignment, we might rediscover something sacred, a unity between mind and matter, between silence and song. The whispering brain, it turns out, was never only ours. It was the Earth's voice, speaking through us all along. There's a moment in every long night when the world seems to pause. The hum of electricity fades, the streets grow still, and the mind, that restless observer, begins to listen differently. It's in this space, between breath and thought, that something extraordinary happens. The boundaries between self and world start to blur. The whispering brain becomes not just the brain within us, but the mind within everything. In the previous part, we explored the possibility that Earth itself holds a kind of intelligence, distributed, slow, and self-regulating. But to truly understand how silence shapes thought, we must turn inward again, toward the intricate landscape of the human mind. Because silence, both in the world and in the mind, is not the absence of sound. It is the medium in which perception deepens, a kind of cognitive gravity that allows thoughts to settle, to find their proper orbit. And this, it turns out, has a profound biological basis. Deep within the brain, as default mode network, a constellation of regions including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus, lies the machinery of introspection. This network is most active, not when we are doing, but when we are being, when the mind drifts, reflects, or rests in quiet observation. It is the neurological signature of daydreaming, self-awareness, and memory integration. When external noise decreases, this network blooms into activity. In silence, the brain begins to process experiences, integrate emotions, and build meaning out of the fragments of daily life. So when we sit in stillness, when we resist the constant pull of stimulation, we are not doing nothing. We are giving the brain space to think in its native language. A 2013 study published in Brain Structure and Function found that 2 hours of silence per day, led to new neuron growth in the hippocampus of mice, the region associated with learning, memory, and emotion. The researchers didn't set out to study silence. They were testing the effects of different sounds. But silence unexpectedly became the most powerful stimulus of all. It appears that the absence of sound acts as a kind of restorative signal, allowing the nervous system to regenerate, much like a forest after a season of stillness. Humans may experience a similar phenomenon. After prolonged quiet, people often report sharper focus, calmer emotions, and a more coherent sense of self. It is as if silence tunes the mind to its own frequency again, the baseline hum beneath all noise. But why would the brain respond this way? To understand that, we must recall that our nervous systems evolved in environments where silence was never empty. In the natural world, quietness meant safety, a pause between events, a sign that no immediate threat was near. It was in these safe intervals that early humans could reflect, plan, or dream. The brain, shaped by millions of years of this pattern, came to associate silence with restoration. And so even now, in our noisy modern habitats, something deep inside us relaxes when sound falls away. The absence of noise does not mean the absence of life. It means the return to equilibrium, the original home of thought. In the language of physics, silence is not pure void, but potential energy, a state of minimal interference that allows systems to reorganize. Likewise, in the brain, quiet moments enable the reordering of neural connections. During sleep and meditation, the brain performs its most intricate maintenance, consolidating memories, pruning unnecessary synapses, and forming new associations. Silence, in this way, is not passive. It is active restoration, the cognitive equivalent of a forest replanting itself in slow motion. Every moment of stillness allows the brain's internal symphony to retune, to clear the distortions of overstimulation. When we experience true silence, not just the absence of sound, but the quieting of inner chatter, we return to the brain's natural rhythm. It's fascinating to note how ancient spiritual traditions, long before neuroscience, intuited this truth. In Buddhist meditation, silence is seen not as withdrawal, but as presence, a doorway to insight. In Christian monastic practice, the great silence marks the hours before dawn, a sacred time for contemplation. In Taoist philosophy, stillness, Wu Wei, is the most natural form of harmony, the state in which action flows effortlessly from awareness. Science now echoes these intuitions. MRI studies show that long-term meditators exhibit thicker cortical regions in areas related to attention and emotional regulation. Their brains literally reshape themselves through repeated immersion in quiet awareness. The result is not detachment, but connection, a state of mental coherence that radiates into every perception. Let's consider an everyday example. Imagine you've spent an afternoon in the city. Horns, voices, screens, notifications. Your mind feels fractured, its thoughts overlapping like mismatched echoes. Then you walk into a forest. The noise recedes. The air thickens with stillness. At first, the silence feels almost uncomfortable, the absence of distraction revealing just how turbulent your thoughts have become. But after a few minutes, something shifts. You begin to notice subtle details, the rhythm of your breathing, the faint rustle of leaves, the heartbeat pulsing in your fingertips. Your senses expand outward, then inward. The world, once fragmented, begins to knit itself together again. This is not imagination. This is neural coherence returning, the resynchronization of the brain as oscillations with the environment's natural tempo. Silence, quite literally, recalibrates the mind. And perhaps that's why silence has always felt sacred. It reminds us that thought does not arise in chaos, but in order, and that beneath every sound, there is always a deeper stillness waiting to be heard. In this way, the whispering brain becomes a bridge between science and philosophy, between neurons and stars. It teaches us that cognition is not a storm of noise, but a dance between sound and stillness, between impulse and reflection. When we learn to listen to silence, we are not escaping the world. We are entering it more deeply, feeling the pulse beneath all movement, the awareness beneath all thought. As neuroscientist Anil Seth once wrote, "Our brains are prediction machines, but what he didn't add, and what silence reveals, is that these predictions are only accurate when the system is balanced. Silence acts as a reset, dissolving excess noise, so that perception can once again match reality. It is the brain's way of clearing the fog before seeing clearly. Without silence, thought becomes echo. With silence, thought becomes revelation. So tonight, as the day quiets and the hum of the world fades, remember this. Your mind is not just an organ of analysis. It is an instrument of resonance. Every pause, every breath, every quiet space you allow is a chance for that instrument to retune. And in that retuning, you will hear it. The gentle whisper of your own brain, shaping thought in the language of silence. Somewhere in the still hours before dawn, the boundary between body and world softens. The air feels thick, almost sentient, and the quiet hum that lingers in the dark seems to breathe alongside you. This is the hour of the whispering brain, the point when thought no longer feels like something we produce, but something that passes through us. And it is in this twilight between awareness and dream that the mind begins its most mysterious work. Sleep has always been a form of silence, not the absence of activity, but a retreat into the deep workshop of the self. The brain, which during waking hours is flooded with sensory input, finally turns inward to process, repair, and rebuild. At night, we experience the paradox of life's quietest miracle. The mind is still, yet alive with creation. Even as consciousness drifts away, billions of neurons continue their careful conversations, whispering in electric pulses that shape who we will be when we awaken. Modern neuroscience has shown that sleep is not passive rest, but active integration. The brain cycles through stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM, each with its own role in balancing thought and emotion. During deep, slow-wave sleep, neurons fire in rhythmic synchrony, flushing out metabolic waste through the brain's glymphatic system, a kind of nocturnal cleansing that removes excess proteins and toxins. It is a silent, pulsating tide that restores mental clarity. During REM sleep, the brain simulates scenarios, merges memories, and invents connections that often appear as dreams. It's here that creativity and emotional regulation flourish, hidden behind the theater curtains of the mind. And perhaps most fascinatingly, these two stages oscillate in a cycle lasting roughly 90 minutes, a biological rhythm that mirrors the waves of thought that roll through waking life. Silence, again, is the backdrop. Even in dreams, the deepest transformations happen in the wordless space between images, in the pauses, the transitions, the unspoken. When we deprive ourselves of rest, when we flood our nights with blue light, sound, and motion, the brain loses this rhythm. Cognitive performance declines, emotional reactivity increases, and our sense of reality begins to fray. In a way, the price of losing silence is losing truth itself. Because the brain's understanding of the world is built on contrast between sound and quiet, action and pause, thought and emptiness. When there is no stillness to measure against, perception loses its anchor. Without silence, the whispering brain cannot hear itself think. In the early 2000s, researchers began to use functional MRI to study the brain's activity during meditation and deep rest. They found something remarkable. As the external world faded from awareness, patterns of neural activity became more ordered, not less. It was as if the brain, freed from sensory bombardment, began to hum in tune with itself. Regions that normally flickered chaotically began to synchronize, forming coherent waves that traveled across the cortex like slow tides. This phenomenon, neural coherence, is the biological essence of peace. When we are quiet, the brain doesn't stop working. it begins to work beautifully. From a philosophical perspective, silence represents something even deeper, the return to presence. All sound exists because of silence, just as all form exists because of space. Without it, there would be no room for life to unfold. In the same way, thought requires emptiness to take shape. It arises out of stillness, just as a ripple emerges from a calm pond. This is what mystics and philosophers throughout history have tried to describe. In Zen Buddhism, silence is the sound of one hand clapping, a metaphor for pure awareness beyond opposites. In the writings of Lao Tzu, silence is the mother of all things, the eternal background from which being itself is born. And in modern physics, the vacuum of space, once thought to be nothing, is now known to be teeming with quantum fluctuations, an invisible sea of potential energy. Everywhere we look, silence is not absence, it is origin. Yet our modern world seems allergic to it. We live surrounded by an orchestra of constant stimulation, buzzing devices, algorithmic voices, the endless hum of artificial urgency. Even our minds imitate the noise, filling every pause with inner chatter, every silence with imagined obligations. The result is a kind of cognitive static, a fog that obscures subtle perception. We may hear everything, yet truly listen to nothing. To reclaim silence is, in this sense, a radical act. It is a way of remembering how to be rather than just do. But silence need not mean withdrawal from life. It can live within motion, in the pause between breaths, the quiet in a friend's gaze, the brief stillness before laughter. This inner silence, cultivated through awareness, becomes a portable sanctuary. It allows us to meet chaos with calm, to hear the world without being drowned by it. In the language of neuroscience, this is metacognition, the ability to observe thought rather than be consumed by it. It's the mental space that allows empathy, creativity, and compassion to flourish. Silence gives us distance, and that distance gives us understanding. There's a beautiful experiment that illustrates this. When two people sit in quiet connection, say, meditating side by side, or simply sharing a moment of stillness, their brainwaves begin to synchronize. This phenomenon, called interbrain coupling, has been measured in studies using EZ. The longer they remain in silence together, the more their neural oscillations align. Their minds, quite literally, begin to whisper in harmony. It is as if silence becomes a shared language, one that bypasses speech and speaks directly from nervous system to nervous system. Perhaps this is why we can feel so deeply understood in the presence of someone who says nothing at all. In such moments, silence is not loneliness. It is communion. The whispering brain, in its most profound expression, connects us not only to our own thoughts, but to the collective hum of all thinking beings. It reminds us that consciousness is not confined within skulls. It flows between us, shaped by every gaze, every breath, every shared moment of stillness. In the end, silence does not isolate. It unites. Some neuroscientists now speculate that consciousness itself might emerge from synchronization, from the precise timing of billions of neurons aligning in quiet coherence. In this view, silence is not just beneficial. It is foundational. It provides the temporal order that makes awareness possible. Without it, the brain's chatter would collapse into noise. With it, thought becomes symphony. So tonight, if you find yourself restless, overwhelmed by the friction of endless information, try this. Sit still. Let the world unfold without commentary. Feel the rhythm of your breathing, the original metronome of life. And listen, not for sound, but for the subtle hum beneath it. That hum is not coming from outside. It is your brain, your body, your world, all quietly remembering that they were never separate things. The whispering brain is not a metaphor. It is the truth of what we are. A universe learning to listen to itself. There comes a point, after enough quiet hours, when thought begins to lose its edges. What once felt like a voice inside your head becomes something wider, something that breathes with the rhythm of the room, the air, the unseen pulse of life moving all around. It is in that moment that silence ceases to be a condition and becomes a presence. It no longer belongs to you or to the world. It simply is. And in that being, something extraordinary unfolds. A glimpse into the deeper intelligence of existence itself. We have journeyed through the science of soundlessness, through the default mode network, the regenerative power of quiet, and the rhythms of the sleeping mind. We have listened to the earth think, felt the neurons rest, and watched awareness bloom in the spaces between thoughts. But there is one last whisper to explore, one that binds them all together. It is the silence that exists before thought and beneath perception. The silence that is not merely in the brain, but in the very structure of reality. Physics, in its most profound equations, describes a universe that is neither noisy nor chaotic, but eerily smooth. At the quantum level, particles flicker in and out of existence, like faint ripples on an infinite sea. That sea, the quantum vacuum, is often described as empty, yet it is far from void. It seethes with possibility, with fluctuations that give birth to everything we see and touch. Silence, then, is not absence. It is the womb of creation, the background hum from which stars ignite, atoms form, and neurons awaken. And our brains, these delicate webs of electrical storms, are themselves miniature expressions of that same cosmic silence. When a neuron fires, it is preceded by a pause, a momentary balance of electrical charge, awaiting. This delay, invisible and fleeting, is what allows timing, synchronization, and meaning to emerge. Without these microscopic silences, thought itself would collapse. Even music, that most human form of expression, depends on the same truth. A melody is defined not by its notes, but by the spaces between them. A pause is what allows a sound to breathe. And perhaps thought, that quiet music of the brain, follows the same law. We think not continuously, but rhythmically. Awareness flickers, on and off, sound and silence, being and becoming. It is in the pauses that understanding gathers strength. The ancient philosophers sensed this long before neurons or quantum vacuums were known. Heraclitus called it logos, the underlying order that speaks through silence. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." And in the Upanishads of India, silence was the sound of Om, the vibration of all that exists and all that does not. Each of these traditions, in their own way, whispered the same truth, that silence is not the end of speech, but its source. Not the opposite of thought, but its foundation. Science, in its unfolding humility, is finally beginning to agree. Neuroscientists who study the resting brain, when no task is being performed, have discovered something astonishing. Even in stillness, the brain hums with activity, cycling through vast patterns of coordination. This is the resting state network, a silent conversation between regions of the mind that maintain a sense of self, identity, and continuity. It is as if the brain, when left alone, replays its own existence, silently reweaving the threads that hold consciousness together. In that silence, the self is not lost. It is remembered. Silence also plays a vital role in learning. Every time we acquire new information, the brain must alternate between states of stimulation and rest. Too much input, and the network becomes saturated, unable to consolidate. Too little, and it forgets. It is during periods of quiet reflection, moments of solitude, walking, gazing, or simply sitting, that the hippocampus integrates what we have learned into lasting knowledge. This is why insight so often arrives not during work, but during pause. Newton beneath the apple tree, Einstein rowing his boat in silence, a poet staring at the sea, waiting for language to emerge. The brain does not think best when forced. It thinks best when allowed to breathe. If we look closely, we can see that life itself has always been a balance between sound and silence, between movement and stillness, birth and decay, inhale and exhale. Even the human heartbeat is not continuous. Between each pulse lies a silence, a small death that gives way to renewal. In that pause, the body resets its rhythm, preparing for the next beat. The entire cosmos, too, seems to move in waves, cycles of expansion and contraction, noise and quiet, creation and rest. And our consciousness is a reflection of that rhythm, a temporary wave on the infinite ocean of awareness. When we return to silence, we return to the source of that wave. We return to the still ocean that has always been there. It's no wonder, then, that silence has been sought across all cultures as the deepest form of healing. Studies in psychoacoustics show that exposure to natural quiet, the soundscapes of forests, deserts, or oceans, reduces cortisol levels, slows heart rate, and enhances neural connectivity in regions related to empathy and emotion. In hospitals, patients who spend time in silent gardens recover faster. In classrooms, short moments of stillness between lessons improve memory retention. Silence, biologically speaking, is medicine. Not metaphorically, literally. It rebalances the nervous system, restores the prefrontal cortex, and resets the amygdala's overactivity caused by stress and fear. It gives the brain permission to trust again, to stop racing against the world. But perhaps the most profound effect of silence is not on the brain, but on identity. In the hush of true stillness, we discover that the self we cling to, the one made of stories, names, and plans, begins to dissolve. What remains is awareness itself, silent, spacious, unhurried. From this quiet vantage, the boundaries between me and world begin to blur. You feel less like a single mind observing existence, and more like existence observing itself. It is an experience both humbling and liberating to realize that the whispering brain is not yours alone, but the universe thinking through you. When you listen to the wind, you are not merely hearing air in motion. You are hearing the pressure waves of stars, translated through leaves and lungs. When you sit in stillness and sense your heartbeat, you are feeling the rhythm of a species that has evolved for hundreds of millions of years. And when your thoughts quiet and awareness widens into silence, you are experiencing the same vast stillness that lies between galaxies. The brain does not create this silence. It remembers it. To live in harmony with silence is to live in rhythm with life itself. It is to remember that every breath, every thought, every act of creation emerges from stillness and will one day return to it. The whispering brain teaches us this simple, infinite truth, that intelligence is not noise. Wisdom is not motion. Understanding is born in the pause between pulses. When we surrender to silence, we are not losing the world. We are finally hearing it. So tonight, as the universe hums gently beyond your window, allow the noise of the day to fade. Breathe deeply. Let each thought dissolve like a ripple returning to a calm lake. And in that stillness, listen closely. The world is thinking in you. And through that quiet connection, you are part of the whisper that never ends.